Okay, hi. I hope you're having a good day. My name's Ian, and this is my final paper presentation for GEO2500. The topic I chose is the environmental impacts of economic growth and development. So typically, when an economy grows and gets further developed, uh, you'll see environmental degradation going along with it. This can take the form of pollution, climate change, obviously, and the extinction of wild animal species. So that is often caused by fossil fuel emissions, obviously, an increase in waste being produced, like plastic and whatnot, and an increase in demand for land, which you need developed land to make factories and whatnot. So this trend took off really with the start of the Industrial Revolution, and it's been getting worse since. Here we have a nice little graph that shows the link between global GDP rising and atmospheric CO2 emissions. So obviously, correlation does not mean causation. However, economic growth does lead to GDP rising, and it definitely leads to more CO2 emissions because that's just where CO2 emissions really come from. So you can see that both are rising at a pretty steady rate since the 1960s, and can't say they're causing each other, but they're definitely linked somehow. So the research questions I chose for this presentation are: what specific impacts does economic development and growth have on the environment, and what specific processes cause it? Excuse me. So that's just seeing the exact way that economic growth can impact the environment. And then the more political geography type question is: what, if anything, should be done to mitigate the environmental impacts of economic growth? So here I took a little picture from The Lorax, which is an excellent book by Dr. Seuss about how economic growth can negatively impact the environment. If you haven't read it, check it out because it's great and it perfectly encapsulates the problem. Because here, economic growth could typically be defined as an increase in gross domestic product. So when gross domestic product increases, there's also an increase in demand for land, labor, and capital by production companies, firms. Excuse me. So when there's an increase in demand for land, labor, and capital, you got to get that land and capital from somewhere. The environment is really the only place we can get it from. So you'll see, land being taken to be used for development purposes, like building factories, administrative buildings, and whatnot. And then also, you need natural resources to make capital, like whether that's the machines being used to produce whatever you're producing, or say trucks used for transport. You need natural resources to make those things. And when you're collecting those natural resources, that not only depletes the resource from the land, but it also, the way you extract it can have very negative impacts on the environment. So as an economy grows, you'll see more problems being caused in the environment. This is known as trade-off, opportunity cost. As the economy grows, you more and more damage the environment. So that could be an issue for sure. And the ways this happens, or the more prominent ways at least, are obviously deforestation, which is at the top left, which can lead to soil erosion and problems like that. Loss of habitat, biodiversity, all those problems. Then you got obviously the emission of effluent, which is that water pipe to the right. That can have issues with water quality, not just in local rivers and streams, but it can also seep down into the groundwater, hurt the plants and wildlife in the area. Then you got plastics and litter like that being emitted into wild spaces. Obviously, that can hurt local wildlife. And then you also got CO2 emissions at the bottom right. Here are some examples of the trade-offs. I won't go into all of them, but the trend of global GDP rising has led to all these issues in environments and natural systems. Air pollution, CO2 emission, I've talked a little bit about a lot of them. So the question then is, should something be done? A lot of people argue that the free market is a robust system that self-regulates, and it should be able to handle an issue like, environmental degradation. So should something be done? Yes, obviously. Because although the free market is a great system and government intervention isn't always a great thing, in the case of the environment, since no one has the property rights to the environment, the free market can't operate taking it into account. So the way we've done it in the past is by the government intervening and regulating, setting taxes and emission limits. A lot of this government revenue earned from these taxes and these taxes and regulations then actually go towards conservation and environmental remediation, which is a good thing because that's directly countering the problem. So that's always a great thing. And then also, sometimes if a company does really bad, they can actually get court orders to cease and desist whatever activity they're doing that is causing environmental problems. It's a good elegant way at least, to solve the problem. It does have some issues associated with it, but it does, lessen the blow of environmental degradation caused by economic growth somewhat. And historically, it's worked pretty decent for us. So the problems with government policies, however, is that they can cause deadweight losses in the economy. They can even lead to corruption in some cases. And the main issue is that it's hard to put an exact monetary value on environmental degradation because it's not always easy to measure the extent and how much a firm should be charged for damaging the environment. So the logical, or I guess the fundamental way to fix this issue then isn't actually policy or anything, but it's rather a social paradigm shift known as degrowth, which is a push to reduce global consumption and production and use environmental well-being instead of GDP as a global measure of prosperity. It's a more difficult thing, definitely, and if you're gonna make legislation on it, that might get tricky and people might not be that for it. But it seems fundamentally, through my research, to be the only way to solve the issue of economic growth hurting the environment, because fundamental issue is that more growth is going to lead to more damage to the environment. So let's just not grow. It can be done. It has a precedent, but maybe too deep of a topic to get into right now. So real quick, I'd just like to end with this page from the Lorax, which just perfectly summarizes the issue between economic growth and the environment better than my 2,000-word essay or this presentation could ever do. And it's just a great book. Dr. Seuss, amazing man. Definitely check it out. And then here are my references.